Hello and welcome to SCN Summit, Future of the Supply Chain, hosted by Food Logistics and Supply and Demand Chain Executive. I am Marina Mayer, Editor-in-Chief, and this session will detail how to prepare for FDA's 204 food safety law. Moderating today's session is Don Durham, Vice President of Customer Solutions for PLM Fleet. Don is a 25-year veteran of PLM Fleet, an industry expert on cold chain transport application and regulatory compliance, and a frequent guest speaker on podcasts and cold chain industry events. Just a quick reminder to our wonderful audience to submit your questions via the Q&A console on the screen at any time throughout our discussion. Make sure you hit submit so it goes through. And don't forget to check out downloadable assets on the main portal page. That's the page that you're looking at right now. You can download some premium content, our media kit, and you can see links to our many awards pages. And with that, Don, so great to see you. As always, welcome to the program. I'm going to hand things over to you.
Great. Thank you, Marina. And welcome to FSMA's 204, the new era of a smarter food safety. It's about to change your world. And are you prepared? So I have some co-presenters that are with me today. And I want to introduce Bridget Blitch. She's a legal expert on food safety regulation. Founded Blitch, Wesley, and Barrett with a passion to serve the supply chain. As part of her practice, Bridget regularly counsels shippers, motor carriers, brokers, warehouse, and freight forwarders and matters, all things related to the execution of transportation contracts and corporate matters. I also have Mike with us here today. He's the owner of JKC Trucking, largest refrigerated trucking based out of Chicago, Illinois. For more than 30 years, JKC Trucking has specialized in moving temperature-sensitive products like produce, meat, dairy products, and the such. So welcome to them. I'm going to actually go through the high level on what the FSMA 204 really is about. So again, we talked about the new era of a smarter food safety, and the FSMA 204 rule has been out for a while now. It's not enforceable yet, but will be. And how did this come about? These are extensions of the original Food Safety Modernization Act that we all see. Congress also wanted some additional rules around tracking and tracing of specific foods that get recalled a lot. And so if you don't know about FDA's initiatives here on FSMA, they actually have a whole website that you can see down there, and you can click on that at some point when you get a copy of this. And you can look at, they have TED Talks. If you want to get a mindset of exactly what's in FDA's mind and how they're going to be able to enforce these rules, I think this is a really good one to listen to see how they're looking at this. And so today, we're going to really do a high-level review of what the rule is, and then we're going to go some areas of concern. And that's why I've got Bridget and Mike on, and really to have some conversation about, what does the rule say? And then how are we going to actually take care of it in supply chain to be able to manage that? So what is FSMA 204? Okay, it's FSMA 204 requires that persons that manufacture, process, pack, or holds food on the traceability list to maintain a supply chain partners. They have to give specific key data elements, which are called KDEs in the rule, and also critical tracking events, or CTEs. And so they look at this as the framework that is the foundation of being able to track and trace. So in essence, what FDA is trying to do is they're tired of going back to where a foodborne illness happens at a restaurant or a grocery chain and say, okay, so where'd you get it from? Because in this country, we only are requiring one up, one back. Where'd you get the food from and where did you send it? So it's a long process of them to find out exactly where a foodborne illness came from. And so what they've done is they've taken certain foods that they're looking at and they put them on a traceability list. And they went through a complex process by which to try to figure out which foods would be on that list. I honestly think it's really more of, these are the foods that get recalled the most. So cheeses other than hard cheeses, shell eggs, nut butter, that would include peanut butter or almond butter, or any type of nut butter that's out there. Cucumbers that are fresh, herbs that are fresh, leafy greens, melons, pepper sprouts, tomatoes, you can see the list. Fruits and vegetables, fresh cut, and ready-to-eat salads, fresh or frozen. Fin fish, there are some exceptions there, crustaceans, mollusks. So these are the products that are actually on that particular list that you have to go. So it's not everything that you have to give traceability to with all these CTEs and the KDEs. It is these certain foods. So if you have a mixture of those products, you have to figure out which ones are actually on that list to be able to look at. All right, so what are some compliance notables? Okay, so what do I have to do? Okay, so it's going to require a sortable spreadsheet to keep all these records in. And then also, you must be able to produce to FDA within 24 hours either a written or a verbal request. So you have to maintain these records for 2 years. Yep, I said that right. For 2 years, you're going to have to maintain these records in that sortable spreadsheet that will be required if the FDA asks you for that within that time frame. So what's the compliance date? The compliance date is actually January 2026. The rule was came out earlier this year in January. They gave 3 years to come with compliance. So it is actually law of the land today. It's just they're choosing not to enforce it for up until January 2026. And that's when all industry has to come in compliance. It's not a phased in approach. It's everybody has to be compliant on that particular day going forward. So I know there's a number of restaurants on there, and how does this actually impact us and grocery chains that are on the call? So the definition actually extends out to restaurants. Any type of food stands, cafeterias, bistros, nursing homes, or kitchens, you're going to have to now retain the information on those products we talked about a little bit earlier for 2 years on a sortable spreadsheet to be able to come across within 24 hours if FDA asked you for something. So those are going to be some of the requirements. What you may not know, and a lot of people skim over this, is that this is also going to include pet shelters and kennels that feed this type of food, fresh food, to an animal. Okay, so grocery stores are going to have to maintain a record. So think about a convenience store, and you've got a peanut butter cracker. I told you that nut butter is on that list. So you're going to have to keep that record for that peanut butter cracker for 2 years at that convenience store. So it is a bit demanding. So what are the requirements here? So some of the requirements that you're going to have to keep records on is that traceability lot code. Everybody kind of agrees, yeah, we need to have that, where it was sourced at, what field it was picked, all those type of things. But what I want you to understand, and this is clipped directly from the rule. I just cut and pasted this because I didn't want to, go give my own opinion on this. I want you to actually see this. But if you receive a food that's on the food traceability list from an entity that's exemption from the rule. So if you're a small farmer, you could be exempt from the rule. But what the government says is that the food is not exempt from traceability. So if you're receiving food from a farm and it doesn't have a traceability lot code, it's your responsibility now as a warehouse that you're receiving it to be able to put a traceability lot code. So you have to figure out where it was picked at, what date it was picked at, and then you have to create that traceability lot code. An additional requirement is that you're not allowed to create new traceability lot codes throughout the supply chain. So if you're tagging up your cases and you're not transferring all the data, in other words, you're putting on so your particular ERP system or your WMS really understands it, then that requirement is going to, you can't do that anymore. You have to have the exact data and transfer it over. So you need to put all that data on there, give it to the next supply chain holder that you're going to ship that to. All right, so what are the things? I'm not going to go too deep in this, but if you're shipping or receiving those KDs, you're going to have to require, that traceability lot code has to travel with it each and every time. How many you're shipping? You don't have to do it at the case level, and we'll get into a little bit of that on one of the areas of concern. But the product description, red cherry tomatoes, whatever that might be, then you got to do the subsequent recipient and then the location of where it was shipped, the location where it was received. So each of you have to prepare a shipping KDE, And then on the receiving side, you have to prepare receiving kitting and keep those records in that repository. So what does that look like for, let's say, look produce? And this is an actually direct clip from one of the graphics from FDA. And so the initial packer is the one that's going to be required to be able to put the traceability lot code on there. Okay. Originally, they were going to start with a farmer to say what field you picked it from, but now they put all that responsibility on the initial packer. So then you have to build that traceability lot code. So in other words, you're going to have that farmer tell you where it was picked. The harvester will tell you exactly what field it was picked, what the description of the product is, if it went through a cooling process, which most produce does, and then an initial packer has to do it. Then if it's transformed anyway to a food processor, that may take lettuce, tomato, cucumbers, onions, and whatever it might be, and create a new product with it. Now you have to create a traceability lot code linking the other traceability lot codes to that particular salad that you're making. And as you ship that forward, it now has the new traceability lot code. And if you're in multiple distribution centers as it travels through, you have to pass all that information along with it. Okay, you don't have to pass all the information of all the linking, because that has to be kept with the food processor that did all that. So let's talk about some areas of concern, and that's why my guests are going to help. So one of the things that the rule does is it's really only 24 pages. 4 pages of that rule are actually the foods itself. Okay, so I said, fruit from trees and stuff. So oranges are off of that list. So they'll give you those designations, and we can definitely get you a copy of that. So one of the things is that's an area of concern is that there's 573 pages that explains those pages. So I'm holding up the rule here, and it's a lot of pages on there. So there's 566 conversations. The way the government does this is that when they put a rule out, they have comments from industry, and then they give responses. The responses are a way of actually looking at how FDA is looking at this and how they're interpreting what they're saying in the rule itself. And so one of the other things I noticed, I ran a report, and 230 times the word however appears in a rule. That can't be good. So one last thing before I bring my guest on, I appreciate you bearing with me here. I needed to get through this part of it, is I had a major pizza company give me a call and said, hey, Don, is the mushroom a fresh cut vegetable that's on the list? Because we don't see that. So I go to Google, and I Google, and it says fresh cut mushrooms are scientifically classified as a fungi because they have no leaves, no roots or seeds, and they don't need light to grow. So they are not a vegetable. So I go to the rule within FSMA 204, and it says, hey, you know what? There are exceptions. And those vegetables are at 112.2 paren A, paren 1. Those are the exceptions under another rule called 1.31305. So then I Google that, I go to that rule, and that's actually the food code. And the food code gives you some exceptions, and these are foods that are not usually consumed raw, like potatoes or northern beans or things like that, but mushrooms are not on there. So then I go to USDA's website, and they said, however, USDA considers mushrooms to be a vegetable because of the nutritional attributes. 2 years ago, FDA and USDA, since they regulate a lot of the same foods, they signed a reciprocity agreement. And they said, you know what, I'm going to agree with you and you agree with me. So my counsel to you, to the pizza company is like, at this point, I would consider a mushroom to be on the list. But you can go to FDA, get a ruling based on that, or consider your legal counsel, which we have Bridget on there. So I really want to talk a little bit today of some other things that we are looking at areas of concern with our guest here. So under the comments and responses, I've clipped these directly from the rule, and I kind of want to go through this and get Bridget's and get Mike's opinion on how this is going to impact industry. So one of the comments was that, I'm receiving food on the food traceability list, and the records that are provided from the previous distributor are incomplete or inaccurate. It could be maybe the barcode is cut or anything like that, and they can't really do a good read on it. So the response from FDA, and again, I give you the section that it comes from so you can look it up yourself on 426. The receiver should ask the source to provide in legible, readable form to complete information required from the shipper under this particular rule. So, Bridget, I'm going to really get you involved in here. What's the liability of a receiver to have this type of information?
Yeah, absolutely, Don. And thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here. And the way that this is going to be viewed, one is from a regulatory compliance perspective, and then the other is from the plaintiff's bar and looking at this rule and seeing what kind of cause of action can we try to bring, or how can we support these regulations if someone gets harmed because of a violation of this regulation. So from a regulatory perspective, it's strict compliance, strict liability. It's not like you intentionally, or you in good faith forgot to get the records from the receiver. No, you have to go back, you have to comply, and show that you did your due diligence to come into compliance with the rule. So there's no language in the statute that allows you grace if you fail to comply. From a civil liability perspective, what I foresee is that the plaintiff's bar is going to say, well, it's negligence per se, because there's a statute on point. You were required to get this information. Had you gotten this information from the receiver, you would have been informed that the food was not in compliance with FDA, and therefore, had you actually followed through, then it never would have gotten to the consumer, and the consumer never would have been injured. So when you're looking at these rules, you're looking at them and you're strictly construing them to ensure that you're in compliance to avoid exposure, one from a regulatory perspective and the other from a civil liability perspective.
All right. And Mike, from industry, what's this going to do as far as when you're shipping out and customers receiving and they necessarily can't read a particular barcode, or they don't have all the information? They may have most of it, but not all of it.
Don, thank you for having me on. So yeah, what it's going to do from a trucking perspective, it's going to complicate our lives, because we're already doing all these regulations. We're over-regulated, and now we're going to have to provide more information to do something. To give you an idea, JDC, we're an LTL company. We're cross-docking about 2 million pounds of LTL product a week. So if I'm going to have to track every single pallet and case of when it cross-docks through my dock, when I'm building the trucks and sending them out, I'm going to need an armada of people to keep track of this information. It's going to cause me to do a lot more to do in business and a lot more data to hold on to just to send some LTLs. And another problem is, when you're a trucker, we are moving product from point A to point B. We're not part of quality control. We try to do the best thing we can, but we are not produce experts when we're hauling produce. We're just moving it from point A to B, not trying to damage it, keep it at the right temperature. And these extra things we have to do to keep track of it, this is going to make it a lot more difficult, and it's going to raise, and if we were forced to do this, we're going to have to raise our prices to get this information, which is going to trickle down to the user, the American people, and they're going to pay more.
Right. I definitely see that. So let's go to the next one. So, and Mike, this ties in a little bit what you were talking about just now. And comment 342 said you would require distributors to maintain sending shipping KDs linked to specific traceability lot codes of the products in each shipment. And what they're looking at was that lot codes will typically travel in an entire pallet, so you could typically have that, but there's going to be instances where you have shorts on that pallet. So to even it up, they pull product from another lot code and put it on there to mix it. So the Congress did not give FDA case level tracking requirement. They told them they couldn't do that. But it's going to, if you're a last mile distributor, and here's the response: we disagree with the comment that requires case level tracking. Conversely, in the entity such as the distributor center receives a small traceability lots of the same product, therefore needs to combine multiple lots into a single shipment. The records for the shipping event would need to be specific to each traceability lot. Okay, but however, this doesn't constitute case level tracking. I would argue, Bridge, I'll get you involved in this. I mean, isn't that really case level tracking? I know they're saying, 2 of this lot number and 10 of this lot number, but you have to really start to understand what the numbers are there, correct?
Yeah, I would, again, err on the side of strict compliance. The operational reality may be, yes, you're going to have to undertake more record keeping and traceability in order to ensure that you know where these cases have originated from and what conditions they've been stored in while they've been in your care, custody, or control. The consequence of noncompliance is that, again, you're either going to be facing regulatory violations, or if, God forbid, something happens and someone's harmed, civil liability exposure. So, of course, I'm going to be on the side of caution and say, if in doubt, comply.
Right. Mike, you talked about an armada of people. You've got product coming into a warehouse or your cross-dock situation. What's it mean for you if you've got multiple lot codes on the same pallet as far as that goes? What does that do for you or what for industry in general?
No, this is a great question, Don. So just to understand lot codes, the trucking companies are not going to understand lot codes because you need to be taught this. And I've been blessed because I work in transportation and we have a public warehouse, so I see both sides of the spectrum. But most truckers are not going to see this part, and they're going to see, well, what's a lot? You have to explain to a customer, look, a lot is when you receive product here in the warehouse, usually each item's a lot, each pallet's a lot. And then you're right. When production ends, half the pallet's one lot, and there'll be another lot for traceabilities, and they'll put them on top of each other. And then we have to figure it out over here, usually separate them or stuff like this. But when the trucker is getting product, it could be mixed lots because you're picking up multiple items, multiple layers, cases, etc. You're going to have to be, number one, educated. And then if even to pick out the lots, you have to be able to figure that out. And then when you're picking up product from a producer, let's say a smaller producer, those items are not easy to go back and track it and figure out. So for the mediocre trucker or the majority of truckers, this is going to be mission impossible. We're going to need to be trained at a very high level to interpret this information because it's complicated, extremely complicated.
Right. Yeah. So let's talk about a transformation event. I mentioned about a producer earlier that the initial packer and they take something and transform it. But one of the comments on 307 really discussed about case breaking down a pallet, and the FDA says really, you know what, if you're breaking down a pallet, you don't necessarily that's not a transformational event, so lot code doesn't change. But if you've got, let's say in food distribution last mile, there might be like 2 cases of tomatoes, an example here. Half of it is spoiled or is not all red, that we like to sell. So we may take those 2 cases and then combine them. So a distributor will now have to go out and create a traceability lot code linking those 2 cases and pulling them back in to be able to do that. So that is one of the things on a transformation event. And again, you're not having, when you deliver pallets to the last mile, you don't have to put all food on there, but you have to link the foods that you're sending separated out by the lot code. So 3 of that and 10 of this. And so it gets kind of confusing here. So Bridget, back to you. Traceability lot codes. Do you know of distributors that have those capabilities or actually do those now? And what kind of legal burden will that put on a distributor?
Yeah, so I'm aware of distributors that are in compliance with this now, and the legal burden is, one, understanding what the rule is, and two, having the software and the technology in order to utilize it. So, being able to develop the barcodes, being able to store that information, having the resources of the people who are going to scan that information, create that table, and have that data readily accessible is going to be the administrative burden. So, for those distributors which are not already doing that, there is going to be, of course, the additional time and training and investment that goes in, if not also the software to go in to be able to maintain compliance.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to go to the next one, and then Mike, I'm going to ask this question of you first. So intercompany moves, okay? One of the comments was, hey, you know what? If we're doing intercompany moves, we shouldn't have to prepare a shipping KD and a receiving KD. It's gonna. So I'll give you an example. A chicken processor. Maybe he's taking something across the street to make chicken nuggets, and he's cutting chicken breast over here, and so he's taking just something in a transfer trailer that just goes right across the street. What FDA is saying is we declined to exempt intercompany shipments from subpart S requirements. So they are going to have to prepare inside that facility a shipping KDE and then a receiving KDE. And this would go even for companies that are doing intercompany transfers, that you're going to have to keep that record in a sortable spreadsheet for 2 years, both of that. So, Mike, to you, how's this going to impact industry that you're seeing?
Well, for I think it's an impact processors the most, because that chicken example you gave, this happens all the time. They'll have to move product from one part of the factory or across the street or let's say across the building, and they're going to have to keep track of that. But in the warehouse business, like we are in some cold storage, we just call that a lot transfer, and we're doing that already. So let's say people buy product from other customers, and what we do is we move that lot from this customer A to the customer B, and we move that lot over. Obviously, we charge the customer for that, but we're building that traceability of where that product came from, so we could connect the dots when the product is in our possession. So we're already doing that. But the processors and other people like this is going to make it a little bit more difficult, and they need to be more specific about the definitions and be more open to polish these rules, because when the FDA is making these rules, they never come and sit down with the producers or the transportation companies as they should, so we can show them our problems, so we can come up with solutions together. That's the frustrating part I see on my part.
Yeah, I would say FDA says we gave you the opportunity in the comment section, and then we respond, is what they would probably say. I want to be clear that if it's in the same building, you don't have to prepare these shipping and receiving KDs. It's if it changes a physical location. And I think that's it. So, Bridget, over to you on these intercompany moves. What kind of burden additional, are you seeing people keeping those records like Mike says, and that's just part of business? Are they keeping them for 2 years at this point, or what's the time limit? What are you seeing out there?
Sure. I would say overall, I am seeing shippers maintain these records. Usually where I'm seeing them is they're not, moves down the road, but they're moving product to another location or facility in a different state. And the concern is for making sure that the product doesn't have any temperature abuse. So they're maintaining these cold chain records so that if there is any concern about the quality of the food product, they'll be able to say, no, here's what this product was maintained at, here's where it was maintained, here's the carrier, the motor carrier it was given to, and then this is the destination that it arrived at. The other concern too is because if they hire a motor carrier and the motor carrier isn't owned by the customer, they also want to be able to identify if there's been any fluctuations in the temperature from when it left their care, custody, or control and went into the care, custody, and control of the transportation provider. So even though the motor carrier is not going to be responsible for this compliance, as the shipper, if it leaves their possession for a period of time, I can understand the purpose behind this rule is because there could be a period of time, maybe it's 10 minutes, but maybe it's several days for which that product leaves the company. So yes, it's an intra-company move, but it's still possibly coming outside of their care, custody, and control.
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you for that answer. So this really kind of dovetails on what you were just talking about, Bridget, is cross-docking. A lot of our food is cross-docked in this country. And one of the comments was, hey, you know what? We just think there should be an exemption for the cross-dock because it's not sitting there that long. And FDA came back in their responses, we kind of agree with you. So we really want to account for point A to point B. We're not really concerned with the cross-dock. But this is one of the howevers. If you look on there, it says, however, we determine whether a food was received at point X. We have to look at such factors as how long the food was held. Now, they don't give you a time limit, on here. So it's like, is it a day? Is it a half a day or 3 days? I don't know. It says at the very end, if it's taken into inventory by the cross-docker X, that kind of makes sense to me. But it says here is it whether it was held under the temperature control conditions that differ from transportation. Mike, I don't know about you, but I've ridden on a lot of trucks, and, the temperature is not always exactly the same on the truck as it is on the cross-dock to be done. If that's the case, and now a cross-docker now has to become part of the record. I'm going to direct this to you, Bridget, first, I think. Now you're going to have to prepare a receiving KD and a shipping KD. I do know some situations that certain retailers will have another company work on do a cross-dock form. The company really doesn't deal with the product at all, but now they got to become part of the records keeping requirement. Do you see that as a burden, or how are you seeing that legally?
Yes, I do see it as a burden. One of the potential options is when you contract with your transportation providers and you contract with your warehouse, you contractually require them to maintain this information. But again, ultimately, that duty is not a delegable duty. So you have to be mindful that even if you contractually require someone to take on that responsibility, you yourself, as someone subject to FSMA and the FDA, have to be able to maintain and produce, as you mentioned, on this information upon request from FDA. So I do see it in the industry. When there are cargo claims, the question becomes, well, how long was it at the warehouse or the docking facility? Because they want to know, when did this food potentially become adulterated or temperature abused? And finding out where that loss occurred is pivotal. So you need to be able to understand at all different times in the supply chain what that product was exposed to, who had possession of it, what the temperature was, and potentially where that damage occurred. So for that reason, I see, why there is some gray, right, in this area, because if there was a potential where it was in an open facility, not under temperature control, that could have exposed it to temperatures outside of its required range, could be a concern for the shipper, the receiver, and those that are required to comply with this rule.
Yeah, I would just give you an example of frozen fish is on there. So if I'm bringing frozen fish, and most controlled docks maybe be at 34 degrees, and it's not going to be at 0 or sub-zero. My follow-up question to you is that a problem when they just say, consider how long the food was held, and they don't give you like a time? And how does a cross-docker, or how does a facility figure that one out?
Well, I mean, one, I think that the shipper that's coming in and selecting where their product is being arranged has to do their due diligence to understand where the product is going to move in the supply chain. Sometimes you do see that being delegated to a broker who's arranging the transportation and then who's then contracting with the warehouse, right? And then it's kind of like playing telephone to make sure how many people are actually following through with the shipper's instructions. So it can be something that, the often what I see is the shipper puts the liability on either the broker or the carrier or the warehouse if it fails to come into compliance with that so that they have contractual remedy. And then the other part of that too is, we haven't really touched on this, but is the insurance part of this, right? Because you may have frozen fish, but if frozen fish comes out of temperature variation for a short period of time, does that mean that it's actually considered damaged, right?
Yeah.
So there could be the difference between what rises to the level of a claim for liability purposes versus whether insurance will trigger and how long, these it was exposed to potentially rise to the level of a claim.
Mm-hmm. So, Mike, back over to you as a practitioner of a cross dock. How do you figure this one out? Other than get with your local attorney that manages your processes as Bridget does, what would what's your suggestion?
No, this is a great question because all of us, truckers and warehouses never sat in one room and discussed, what's going to be the main plan, how we're going to do it. So let me tell you the perspective from the trucking company and the perspective from the warehouse cross dock, because the two definitions are a little bit different. When I'm doing LTL, my cross dock is sitting. I'm crossing the product within hours of on the dock. I have a refrigerated dock that's cold all year. I'm cross-docking refrigerated and frozen product. A lot of people say that you should have a colder dock to do frozen, but back in the day we used to have dry docks, and if the ambient temperature was 90 degrees, we were swinging in at 90 degrees. So I feel real comfortable that we have a number one refrigerated dock because it helps that product from thawing and that temperature fluctuation that Bridget keeps talking about. And you're going to have fluctuation in temperature through the whole logistic process. Just you don't want swings. So if you keep the swings to the minimum, that's a win-win-win first. So trucking is within hours, but in the warehouse, I have customers that bring in tons of product for cross-docking, and a cross-docking, an average in the public warehouse, cold storage is between 1 day to 3 days max. Right. Then it goes into regular storage. But the different part is when it's coming to the warehouse, we are putting that product away in the freezer or in the cooler. We're segregating into the right areas because until the rest of the product comes and the customer says, look, you have enough product, load this truck to point A, this one to B, and this one to C. So it's a big difference when you compare the two, because in transportation it has to be hours, and in the warehouse it could be from 1 to 3 days.
Yeah, thanks for that real world experience about how things really work in supply chain. So, what's the FDA's future of food? They talk this, they asked a response. One of the comments was, why don't you just for all food? Instead of just rip the Band-Aid off and do it for everything. They were like, yeah, you know what? We think that that's really what we should be doing, but that industry would benefit from it, but they're not doing that at this point. Under the food traceability rule, they're going to re-examine it, they say about every 5 years. And that if they decide that food comes off, it will be immediately taken off. If there is a food that is going to be put on it, they'll give you a grace period, like 2 years or something, to be able to process that, to pull that in. So just kind of wrapping things up here, I would be remiss if I don't really have a conversation about, the Department of Justice's collaboration with FDA. So we're, from a food processor situation, there's a gentleman spending 28 years in jail. There was a restaurateur chain that was fined $25 million, along with a 3-year deferred prosecution. That's criminal prosecution, by the way. Another processor was 6 felony counts against him. Hung jury, settled for paying a $100,000 fee to make it go away. A food distributor was fined $19.5 million for distribution practices. So, not throwing any names out there, but as I've gone through these food safety conferences that I attend, this is Matt Lash. He's from the Department of Justice, and basically says during an investigation, the first thing he looks at is whether a food safety culture is one of the things that he looks at in a company. Again, Bridget, over to you. And, I know that, I haven't found any specific penalties within that, but I know there's some penalties, within FSMA rules itself. And I think they go back to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Can you comment a little bit on the activity that you're seeing that I quoted on here?
Yeah, so the Department of Justice does have jurisdiction to enforce violations under the Food Safety Modernization Act and under the FDA, and has created a penalty scheme for which those can be enforced for violations. And it's strict liability. So if you think you're acting in good faith, or you thought, it was just negligence, it doesn't matter. Or if it was, you say, oh, well, it wasn't intentional, so I shouldn't be found in violation of this rule. That doesn't matter. You either do it or you don't. But kind of taking this out of context, a lot of times companies will have employee training for ensuring that you're doing your due diligence and complying with labor and employment laws. The same thing should be done here. I mean, we've got the very now robust scheme of rules coming down on food distributors, producers, now restaurants. Having that same level of training to meet with your team and say, what are we doing to ensure? What are the rules? Just like what you've done here today. Done. How do we show that our people are participating in these kind of programs and seminars to be educated about what the rules are, have a refresh at least once a year, if not more frequently, to show that you do have that food safety culture, because that, number one, is going to ensure that your team knows what they need to be doing to come into compliance. Now, that doesn't mean that that's a defense in the event of an investigation or enforcement action, but it is record evidence to show that you are working to maintain compliance with these FDA regulations. So a little bit of due diligence can go a long way. From what I see, I mean, it looks like the DOJ, just like many prosecutors, have a lot on their plate, and they're looking for the serious offenders, which is why we're seeing the examples that you just spoke about, Dawn. I'm not seeing it at a more micro level, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to come, or that there's not going to be more people that get added to the ranks of enforcement. So we need to treat this as though anyone could come knocking on our door, and we need to be prepared to show, if that happens at any point in time, we're going to be in compliance.
Yeah, Bridget, I'm going to stay with you for just this one more. And so really, I mean, my opinion is, and looking at things, is that I don't think FDA is going to come knock on your door and say, let me see your sortable spreadsheet for 2 years. It's going to be, what I'm seeing in the past here is, if they have a foodborne illness and you go back and they're going to start working their way backwards, if you don't have the record, they're kind of going to make an example of you. Is that a fair assessment? I know it's pretty basic, but...
I think possibly. I mean, there's always that risk, right, that you could be the example, and certainly want to avoid that. So we want to err on the side of compliance. But I think on a more business level too, what I think is going to be more common is that you're going to see that between the supply chain, these parties are going to be contracting with each other to say that we also have the right to audit your records, and we want to see your portable spreadsheet. We can tell you within 24 hours, hey, if we were the FDA, how good are you at compliance? So maybe it's not going to be the DOJ, but maybe it's going to be your customer, or one of your partners in the supply chain that looks at you to say, hey, are you the right partner that I want to work with? So that's what I see more often in other contexts. And with compliance like this, I would anticipate that's something that's going to come down the pipeline. And other supply chain attorneys are going to be encouraging their distributors, their warehouses to say, hey, do your own due diligence to make sure that you're partnering with companies that know FDA rules.
So, Mike, this is the last question for the session. And really, you mentioned this before, is I think you talked a little bit about expanding the collaboration along supply chain stakeholders. And how important is that going to be going forward?
You know, I think it's going to be very crucial because right now, for me, if you read these regulations, it sounds like everybody needs to, have these data to protect themselves. So when a lawsuit comes along or something comes along, that we could say, look, here's our data protecting us. It wasn't us. Move to the next link. You know what I mean? And that's great, but we should be thinking this thing as a whole. You know what I mean? From farm to the restaurant or to the end user, because there's people involved, like transportation people. I have this all the time. To give you an example, I'll be picking up produce on the West Coast, right? And it gets harvested really quick. It's not cooled fast enough. And then we get in our truck, we shoot it down here. The receiver is saying, it's warm. You didn't keep temp. Well, we did keep temp. But one of the things they don't understand is that our refrigeration units are designed to maintain temp, not cool product. Produce is a very delicate animal because it's still alive. It's radiating heat. It needs constant air circulation. It's just very, very complicated, more complicated than other food products. And in the trucking, it's very frustrating because they're always trying to put the finger to the trucker. But we're like, how about this? Show us when it came out of the fields. How long did you guys cool it? Show us that information when it shipped. And they're always saying, well, the driver has to probe the product. The driver could probe the product. You have to be trained. You have to have the right equipment. And it doesn't help if you're being loaded 6 to 8 hours. You can't have your driver standing on the dock, saying, okay, whenever you guys are ready for 8 hours. No driver's going to do that. I wouldn't do that if I was the truck driver. I'd be like, I'm taking a break. I'm going to take a nap.
Right.
I'll do my best.
Right. Exactly. So I'm going to bring Marina back and see if we have any questions. We've got a little bit of time left. And so welcome back, Marina.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Great job so far. Yes, we do have some questions coming from the audience, and to those that still have not submitted but still would like to do so, you still have time. And if we do not get with them, then Don or somebody from the panel session will get back to you. So Don, let's start with you. Are there any solutions out there to help us meet these regulations?
Yeah, actually, so I'm just going to give you an example from my own company. So PLM actually has a product called PLM TrustLink. What it really does is that stakeholders have different ERP systems and WMSs that do not talk to one another, and that's a bigger problem. We talked a little bit about that with Mike about collaboration. And so one of the things, the way you can think about this is that you basically get an app and it goes between supply chain partners. And so you may have some information that you're trying to transfer, and it might be in Chinese. And we can translate that information with software, basically a SaaS program, and it basically gives you English. And then if you're missing some data or some information, it can actually tell you, hey, you need to supply this information to the receiver. So that's a real simple way of looking at it, is let the software do the hard labor, so you don't have to hire an armada of people to be able to keep these and source these records. But a great question.
Okay, so this one is for Bridget. We have a food safety position within the company. Should we also look at a review with our attorney to ensure we are engaging FDA properly? What are your suggestions?
Yes, I would absolutely suggest you engage with your qualified safety counsel and have that person work with your internal operations. Again, like doing a yearly audit to say, what are the updates in the rules? Are there any cases that are now interpreting what these rules mean? Are there any cases we can look up as attorneys? We can look up on a federal database called PACER to see what lawsuits have been filed, to see if anything is trending. So I do agree that having your qualified counsel is important so that you can stay up to speed on the latest rules and how they're being interpreted, and making sure that you're coming into compliance.
So I think this next one is for Don, but I'm assuming anybody can jump in at this point in time. You mentioned earlier the requirement to maintain a sortable spreadsheet. Doesn't the rule also include a mandate to have a digital connection with trading partners, both upstream and downstream?
Great question. And Bridget, I'll take it the first. Here's the thing. Congress does not mandate, neither does FDA, and they're not mandated to a technology. Okay, so a sortable spreadsheet is something that they are asking for. I would argue that might be a technology if they're using it, but no, there's no mandate from electronic, ASNs or something like this to be sent forward. So.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything like that. I don't know that it ever is going to get like what the trucking world experience with electronic logging devices, and where there's going to be certain vendors that are going to be authorized to house these sortable spreadsheets, or how accessible that they're going to be. Usually the regulation is you comply, you create it, but you don't have to use a certain vendor, or they don't endorse any particular product.
Michael, this one is for you. Do you see trailers needing new sensors for such things as reading RFID codes from foods as they are loaded and unloaded?
That's a great question. So RFID codes is a little bit complicated because I could see that in the future, but the problem is we try to use the RFID codes in the warehouse. So each RFID code is, costs over $1 just for that device to link to each product or pallet. And you'd have to put it to each pallet. And if there's 30 pallets, so it'll be 30 pallets. And then give you an idea, we're doing labels, and we're printing over 10,000 labels a week. So we would need over 10,000 RFID codes. And then if we do provide that, there's no technology in the trailers yet that would read a RFID code. Number one, read it and then store it and push that somewhere. It's great technology, I would say, for the future. We're not there yet, and it would be very, very costly to do such a thing. That would just increase the final cost of the product.
And I just want to add here, just to comment that, one of the things that we often see in the transportation industry is a requirement that the driver pulp the product, or may identify what the temperature is before it gets into their trailer. Sometimes that is just not practical for a driver to do. They don't have the tools necessary to properly pulp the product. So that's, all the more reason why somebody who's giving that package or that cargo to the carrier needs to identify what the temperature is before it gets loaded into the trailer. So there is, unfortunately, I think, a lot of push on the trucking company to pulp this product, when the operational reality is those tools to actually accurately get that temperature is not within the drivers or the motor carrier's purview.
So, Marina, I'll jump in this one too. So there are new technology which our software can actually do also to ingest that RFID chip. There are pennies now that we're able to source now to be able to do that. And, what we're learning is that retail, and it's about ROI, it's where you're saving monies at. And so retail has experienced, using chips for many, many years. We basically bringing that into food now. And so now you can work in a touchless environment and not have to physically count everything to be able to do it. You can actually have stuff that passes through portals. And yes, one day we're going to be able to watch your food roll down. I've got 15,000 refrigerated trailers at PLM. And through, you're going to be able to watch your food travel down the road, because we're going to know exactly where it's at. It's where we're going. It's where we headed. It's where the future of food is.
So I think we have time for one more question. And this one is for Don. I have heard from a trade association that we are members that say that the 204 rule may get struck down. What are your thoughts and what are the chances of that happening?
Yeah, I've heard that too. And I think, here's the fact. The 204 is actually law of the land today. Okay, so it went through the process, and it is law. They're choosing not to enforce it. Okay, I will tell you, and I'll just use, some states allow you to do marijuana. Okay, for medical marijuana or something like that, or recreational, but it's still against federal law. At any moment, the federal government can come in and shut all those down. So I'm just saying that it's still a law in the books. It's just not enforceable. Could FDA delay enforcing? And I'll throw this over to Bridget to see if she agrees with me. They could delay enforcing, in the future or something like that. Nobody that I've talked to believes that we should have started this all off and make everybody on day one, January 2026, to be required to do this. We should have started with processors for a while, for a couple of years, then move over to other stakeholders, supply chain, and restaurants 10 years from now, so we could have time to ingest it. So, Bridget, is there anything you want to say on that?
I agree with you, Don. I think that we've seen this with other laws that have come into effect affecting the transportation and supply chain, and there is the grace period that you have for a period of years in order to come into compliance. I don't see a court striking down this regulation or there being any new regulation in Congress to rewrite this rule. I think that it is, like you say, just a period of time before the enforcement process comes into play.
Well, thank you, Don, Bridget, Michael. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been truly educational and informative, and I really enjoyed hearing what you all had to say from your respective places of business throughout the journey. And thank you, as always, to our wonderful audience. An archived version of today's presentation will be posted at scnsummit.com. All you do is access the link from the registration link that you used to log in today, and you can access the on-demand version. While you are at scnsummit.com, if you have not already, please register for our next session. It's at 2 o'clock Central today. Don will be returning, and we will be talking about the rise of electrification. You can also register for tomorrow's sessions, which will cover the state of e-commerce and supply chain visibility. And then you can also register for the on-demand version of our previous sessions on state of volume rebates and warehouse automation, which took place this morning. Just go to scnsummit.com. Again, my name is Marina Mayer, Editor-in-Chief of Food Logistics and Supply and Demand Chain Executive, and I hope to see you again at our next SCN Summit event.